They tell you some truths are too dangerous to know. I'm telling you, that's a lie. The truth is dangerous not because of what it reveals, but because of what it makes you capable of. And once you see it, there's no way back. In the dying summer of 1874, the Appalachian Mountains swallowed 3 armed men whole. They didn't vanish into legend. They were buried in shallow, hurried graves, each with a bullet in them. From a rifle, they should have been impossible to face. The killer wasn't a war-hardened veteran. It wasn't a band of outlaws. It was a 12-year-old boy named Thomas Weaver, a child who walked out of those mountains calm, cold-eyed, and carrying a weapon nearly as tall as himself. His clothes were torn, his skin flecked with other men's blood, and when asked what happened, he only said 3 words. They deserved worse. The authorities sealed the files. The newspapers wrote nothing. And the sheriff, a man who owed more to the coal barons than to the people he swore to protect, marked the case as a resolved by mutual agreement. The words are still there, rotting in some courthouse basement, guarded not by locks, but by the fact that no one dares ask for them. But here's the part no one wants you to know. Those 3 men weren't victims of some child's madness. They were corporate enforcers for the most powerful force in West Virginia at the time, the Consolidated Coal Company, a private empire that ruled not with laws, but with control. If they wanted your land, they took it. If they wanted your labor, they owned it. And if they wanted you gone, you were gone. Thomas Weaver didn't just kill 3 men. He declared war on the very system that fed on his people's blood and fear. And if you follow me down this story, you're going to see the real machinery behind it, the hidden agreements, the psychological chokeholds, the ancient rules of power that corporations, governments, and secret societies have been perfecting for centuries. This is a descent, not a history lesson. So hear me clearly, this story isn't about a boy in the mountains. It's about why they fear the man who knows how power really works, and why, once you understand it, they can never put you back in the cage again. The mountains in 1874 were not just stone and soil. They were a living thing, ancient and patient, watching generations of men rise and fall. But by that autumn, something unnatural had wormed its way into them. The sound of wind through the pines had been replaced by the groan of machinery. The rivers that once ran clear now carried a bitter black sheen, and the air itself, tasted of coal dust, a fine poison that settled on every tongue, in every lung. The Consolidated Coal Company had become more than an employer. It was a sovereign state without borders. It didn't need armies because it owned the sheriffs. It didn't need laws because it wrote them. And it didn't need prisons because fear was the cell and everyone lived inside it. They called their armed agents the coal police. No uniforms, no badges, just the authority of a paycheck signed by men who could crush a town like an insect. They were former Confederate raiders, discharged Union soldiers with no peace left in them, and drifters who learned that corporate loyalty was more profitable than morality. They drank hard, killed easy, and followed one law, the company's will. If they decided your family owed rent, you were thrown out that night. If you argued about wages, they made sure you never argued again. And if you whispered that maybe, just maybe, a man should have the right to breathe clean air while he worked, they came to your door. At midnight, the Weavers, Thomas, his older brother Jacob, and their father Samuel, had managed to keep their independence longer than most. Their cabin sat on a ridge above Keek, built by Thomas's grandfather from logs cut before the coalmen arrived. They hunted their own game, kept their own chickens, traded with neighbors who still remembered a life before the script, the debt, the cages. But independence was a dangerous thing. The coal company didn't just want your labor, it wanted your submission, and the Weavers were already marked. What Thomas saw in those days wasn't just poverty, it was something older, something darker, a game as old as empires. Take control of the food, the land, the safety, and the very rhythm of a man's breath. And you can own him without chains. That was the truth his young mind was already calculating. And in a world where most men learned to bend, Thomas Weaver was beginning to learn how to break things. On the morning of September 15th, 1874, Samuel Weaver woke before the sun, but not from the cold or the hunger that most men in the hollows knew too well. He woke because he had made a choice, the kind of choice that snaps a man's life clean in half. In the corner of the cabin, on the rough-hewn table, lay a single folded sheet of paper, every word written in Samuel's careful hand. It was not a love letter, nor a prayer. It was a petition, 47 names signed beneath a list of crimes the Consolidated Coal Company swore it didn't commit. Rotten timber supports that bowed and cracked over men's heads. Ventilation so poor the air could kill you before the rock did. Miners forced into unstable tunnels at gunpoint. Supervisors who said plainly, you either work or you disappear. These weren't rumors. These were facts. And worse, they were patterns. And Samuel knew something most men hadn't dared admit yet. The accidents weren't accidents. Every collapse, every unfortunate mishap was another tool of control. Because if you can make death part of the job, you make fear part of the man. And a fearful man will keep his mouth shut. Samuel's plan was simple, but it was also fatal. He would present the petition at shift change, in front of other miners, leaving no room for the foreman to deny what was written. There would be witnesses, there would be truth in the open air, but in the mountains, truth does not stay in the open air for long. By the time Samuel descended into the shaft of mine number 7, the foreman, Augustus Blackwood, already knew every detail. There was a rat among the 47, a man with debts too deep and a child too sick to gamble on principle. When Blackwood took the paper from Samuel's hands, he didn't read it. He tore it into pieces, let them fall to the dirt like dead leaves, and told every man who signed it to report to his office after the shift. No one needed to be told what that meant. Men who went to that office did not come home. That night, as the weavers ate cornbread and rabbit by lamplight, Samuel explained it to his sons in the slow, deliberate voice of a man who knew time was short. Jacob's fists clenched. He wanted to fight. Thomas just watched. And outside, in the dark, 3 horses were already approaching. The sound came first, not the gallop of pursuit, but the slow, deliberate rhythm of men who know their prey is cornered. 3 horses, heavy-hoofed in the damp earth, drawing closer until even the flicker of the lamplight seemed to lean toward the sound. Samuel rose from the table without a word. His hand brushed the worn handle of the knife on his belt, an old habit, but his eyes never left the window. Through the glass, fogged with years of coal dust and mountain cold, he saw them. Marcus Finch, Dale Hutchinson, James Crawford, the company's trinity of violence. Finch dismounted first. Tall, lean, with a grey that had nothing to do with age and everything to do with the winter inside him. His black coat was clean pressed, the kind of clean you can only get when your work never stains you long enough to matter. He was the one who spoke to you first, the one who smiled when he told you what was going to happen, the one who made you believe it was inevitable. Hutchinson swung down next, a wall of muscle and scar tissue, big enough to block out the lamplight when he passed. His hands were cracked and calloused, but not from honest work. This was the man they sent when they wanted a lesson written in bone. And then there was Crawford. Average in every way, height, build, face. But that was the trick. You forgot him in a crowd. You didn't see him coming. And when the deed was done, you still wouldn't believe he'd done it. He was the knife you never saw until you felt the steel. They didn't knock. Finch simply opened the door as though he owned the cabin, which, in the company's eyes, he did. His boots left wet marks on the floorboards as he stepped inside, the other 2 fanning out behind him. "Evening, Samuel," Finch said, voice low, almost polite. "We need to have a conversation about that paper you passed around." The lamplight caught the edges of Samuel's jaw as it tightened. Jacob's chair scraped the floor as he stood, ready to meet them with fists or steel. But Thomas didn't move. He just studied the men, the way Finch's eyes stayed on his father, the way Hutchinson's shoulders angled toward Jacob, the way Crawford had already stepped close enough to block the door. The game had begun, and Thomas was already thinking 3 moves ahead. Finch didn't raise his voice. Fires. Men like him didn't need to. Every word was measured, deliberate. A scalpel, not a hammer. "The company," he began, "I can't have men spreading wild ideas. Gets people hurt. Gets people thinking they're more important than the work." His eyes never blinked as he spoke. They were pale, colorless, like something carved from ice and kept in a drawer until needed. Samuel didn't flinch. "It wasn't wild ideas, Marcus. It was the truth. Those mines aren't safe, and you know it." Finch let the silence stretch until it pressed against the walls. "A truth's a dangerous thing to throw around, Samuel. Might be the last thing you get to carry." Hutchinson shifted his weight, the floorboards groaning beneath him. He was staring at Jacob now, not like a threat, but like a butcher checking the weight of the next cut. Crawford still blocked the door, his hands loose at his sides, empty, but Thomas noticed the bulge beneath his coat, the telltale print of steel. "You'll be at the foreman's office tomorrow," Finch continued. "Early, alone. We'll discuss your future." The pause before that last word was calculated, a reminder that a man's future could be measured in hours. Samuel didn't answer. There was nothing to say. He knew and they knew he knew. The conversation was theater. The sentence had already been passed. When Finch finally turned to leave, he gave the room one last sweep with those Night in the coal town was not quiet. It breathed. The mountains held the wind in their narrow lungs, letting it whistle through the gaps between shacks, carrying the distant thump of machinery that never truly slept. But beneath that constant hum was something sharper tonight. Footsteps where there shouldn't be footsteps, voices kept too low for words to carry, the metallic click of rifle bolts in the dark. Samuel sat by the cold stove, boots planted, shotgun across his lap. Jacob paced in short bursts like a man caged too long. Every time he passed the window, he peeked through the ragged curtain toward the road. Thomas lay on the floor, eyes half closed, but he wasn't resting. He was listening. He was listening. The patterns were clearer here in the dark. Two men shifting their weight outside the back door, another posted at the bend in the road, the occasional creak of saddles when the watchers swapped places. They weren't waiting for morning. They were just waiting for the moment when exhaustion cracked the weavers open. "We can't fight 'em all," Jacob whispered, as if the truth would be quieter if spoken that way. "We're not going to," Samuel said. "Not head-on." Thomas opened his eyes then. "They're not going to come through the front. They'll circle behind. Wait until you step outside to check the noise. Crawford'll be the one to take the shot. He's the only one who doesn't miss." Both men stared at him. Jacob's jaw tightened. "And you know this. How?" "Because that's what I do." Silence settled like coal dust. Samuel studied his son for a long moment, and Thomas could see it, the question behind his father's eyes. "When did you start thinking like them?" "Outside." A soft scrape. Someone dragging something across the dirt. A barrel, maybe, or a body. "They'll try to smoke us out," Thomas said, sitting up now. "Force us into the open. But if we move before they expect it, we can get behind the first two men without them knowing." Jacob scoffed. "You're talking about taking the fight to them." Low, calm in a way that didn't sound like a boy's voice anymore. "I'm talking about taking away their advantage. Men like that don't know what to do when they're the ones being hunted." In that moment, Samuel didn't see his son. He saw something else, something sharper. And for the first time all night, the thought crossed his mind that maybe, just maybe, they might survive this. The moon was a sickle of dull light, barely enough to outline the jagged edges of the hills. Thomas moved in it like he belonged there, not creeping, not rushing, just flowing from shadow to shadow the way the wind moved through grass. Every step was chosen. Every pause was timed to the rhythm of the men outside. The first sentry was exactly where Thomas expected, leaning against the post at the bend in the road, rifle hanging loose in his hands. His head turned every few seconds, but his eyes were lazy, confident in the belief that prey only runs in one direction. Thomas crouched low in the ditch, counting the gaps between glances. 1, 2, 3. On the fourth he moved. Dirt muffled his steps until he was close enough to hear the man's breathing, a dry cough, the faint rasp of leather against wool. Thomas slipped a rock from his pocket, flat, heavy, and raised it just enough to feel its weight. One sharp blow behind the ear, and the sentry dropped without a sound. Thomas dragged him into the brush, face first, to muffle the breathing that was turning wet and shallow. He didn't think about it. He didn't let himself think about it. From here, he could see the faint orange glow where the other two men sat near a low fire, their backs to the weaver shack. One was Crawford. Even at a distance, Thomas could feel the man's patience, the way he studied the dark like it was a living map only he could read. He couldn't take them both, not head-on, but he could break the pattern. He stepped into the trees, snapping a branch just loud enough to be heard. Crawford's head turned instantly, a rifle rising. The other man followed, boots scuffing as they moved toward the sound. Thomas kept backing away, always just visible enough between the trunks to pull them deeper. When they were far enough, he slipped sideways into the undergrowth, circling back toward the fire. The flames were small now, barely embers, but they lit the way to the barrels stacked against the shack, the same barrels Thomas had heard being dragged earlier. Kerosene. Enough to burn the house to ash. He didn't have much time before they realized he wasn't ahead of them anymore. But time, Thomas thought, is just another weapon. And tonight, it was in his hands. Thomas crouched beside the barrels, his fingers brushing over the rough staves. The smell of kerosene was sharp, metallic and cold, the kind of smell that told you it would cling to skin and clothes long after the fire was gone. He tipped the first one slowly, just enough to let a thin ribbon spill across the dirt. It ran downhill toward the edge of the trees, tracing a path no one but he would see in the dark. The second barrel he left upright but loosened the lid so the fumes would breathe out into the night. Every sound in the distance sharpened, the crunch of boots through fallen leaves, the low murmured curses of men who knew the darkness had lied to them. Crawford's voice cut through, calm and precise. "Circle back. He's here." Thomas worked faster now, dragging one barrel just far enough to wedge it between two rocks, where it could be tipped with a single shove. He laid the last stretch of kerosene toward the fire pit, where only embers glowed. He didn't need much flame, just enough to make them panic. The plan was clear in his head, not as a thought but as a shape. They'd return to find the barrels close, smell the fuel, realize the trap too late. In that moment of hesitation, Samuel and Jacob could strike from the front while Thomas cut off the rear. No shouting, no warning, just the fast, ugly end of an ambush. Leaves rustled behind him. Not far. Thomas froze, breath held. A silhouette slid between two trees, tall, lean, rifle steady. Crawford, the hunter, had found his trail. "A boy," Crawford said softly, like he was coaxing a stray dog. "You know you can't win this." Thomas's hand tightened on the matchbox he'd taken from Jacob earlier. One flick, one spark, and the world between them would turn to fire. "Maybe not," Thomas murmured, just loud enough to be heard. "But I can make sure you don't win either." The match struck. The tiny flare reflected in Crawford's eyes, and for the first time, Thomas saw something there that wasn't confidence. It was recognition. The look of a man who realized too late he was staring at something that didn't belong in a boy's face. Then Thomas dropped the match. The moment the match hit the kerosene, the night seemed to inhale. An aid seemed to inhale. A pale blue tongue of flame crawled across the dirt, hesitated, and then roared to life in a sudden, rushing bloom that lit the trees like a sunrise from hell. Crawford's rifle came up instantly, but Thomas was already gone, diving sideways into the ditch as the heat blasted past his face. The barrels caught next, one after the other, belching thick black smoke into the cold air. The glow turned the forest into a twisted theater, every branch a claw, every shadow a predator. Damn it!" someone shouted from the trees. The company men burst into view, coughing and squinting, their silhouettes jagged in the firelight. Thomas saw Samuel and Jacob slip from the brush, silent as wolves, moving in on their flanks. The chaos was perfect, men stumbling, eyes watering, no clear direction to run or fight. Crawford didn't stumble. He moved through the smoke like it was nothing, head turning, searching. When his eyes locked on Thomas, it was like the fire didn't exist at all. Thomas ducked back, heart pounding. He knew Crawford wouldn't hesitate, and he couldn't outshoot him. But here, in the choking dark, a rifle wasn't always faster than a blade. He kept low, circling behind a fallen log, letting the noise of the fire mask his steps. To his left, a sharp grunt, the sound of a man dropping Samuel's work, then a cry of pain from the other side as Jacob's knife found its mark. The company was breaking, panic flooding their ranks faster than the smoke. Thomas reached the edge of the clearing just as Crawford stepped into it, the fire painting his face in streaks of golden shadow. For a heartbeat, they stood still, predator and prey, though Thomas wasn't sure anymore which was which. Crawford lifted his rifle. Thomas moved first. He lunged forward, knocking the barrel aside as the shot cracked, the sound swallowed by the fire's roar. The two slammed together, rolling in the dirt, the heat licking at their backs. Crawford was strong, stronger than Thomas had expected, but desperation had its own kind of strength. Somewhere in the struggle, Thomas's hand found the knife on his belt. He didn't think. He didn't plan. He just drove it forward. The blade sank in with a sickening, muffled sound. Not the clean slice Thomas had imagined, but a wet, resisting crunch as it pushed through fabric, flesh and bone. Crawford's breath hitched, a sharp intake that turned into a ragged growl. His hands clamped down on Thomas's wrist, the strength in them shocking even now, even wounded. They locked eyes, not predator and prey anymore, but two men bound in the same moment, each knowing only one would leave it. Crawford's pupils shrank in the firelight, his jaw clenching as he tried to twist the knife from Thomas's grip. Thomas leaned in, using his weight, the smell of burning kerosene and sweat thick in his nostrils. He could feel Crawford's heartbeat pulsing against the hilt, slowing, stuttering. The man's face, so sure, so composed minutes ago, was breaking apart, lines of pain etching deeper with every second. "You could have walked away," Crawford rasped, his voice dry and cracked. "So could you," Thomas spat back. The final push was almost mechanical. Thomas drove the blade deeper until Crawford's hands fell away, the rifle clattering uselessly beside them. The man sagged, his head rolling toward the dirt, eyes still open but empty now, seeing nothing but the fire's reflect. Thomas stayed there a moment longer, his chest heaving, the handle of the knife still buried in Crawford's ribs. Around him, the night was chaos. The shouting of wounded men, the crackle of the flames, Samuel barking orders to finish the job. Yet in that tiny circle of dirt, it was silent. He pulled the knife free. Warm blood streaked his hand, sticky and dark, and for a moment he stared at it, unsure if it felt like victory or loss. The truth was, it felt like neither. It just was. Behind him, Jacob appeared out of the smoke, a thin smear of blood along his cheek. His eyes darted to Crawford's body, then to Thomas's expression. He didn't ask. He didn't need to. "We've got to move," Jacob said simply. "A fire's spreading," Thomas nodded, wiping the blade on Crawford's coat before standing. The forest around them was glowing now, embers swirling in the wind like fireflies from some darker world. Whatever they had come here to end was over, but something else had begun. And Thomas knew, as he stepped back into the burning trees, that it wasn't going to let him go. Dawn crept in slow, pale and cold, the kind of light that doesn't warm, only reveals. The smoke had thinned overnight, drifting away into the hills, but the smell still clung to everything: burnt wood, charred cloth, and something underneath it all, coppery, metallic, that no wind could fully carry off. Thomas stood on the ridge above the clearing, boots sinking into ash that used to be underbrush. What was left of the barrels lay in jagged black rings, and the fire's path was carved into the earth like the scars of a wound. Here and there, a boot print or a blood trail broke the monotony of grey, reminders that the fight had been real and that it had ended for most of the men down there. Behind him, Samuel and Jacob moved quietly, salvaging what they could from the wreckage. They didn't speak much. Words felt too heavy now, too capable of making things real in a way neither of them was ready for. Thomas's gaze drifted to where Crawford's body had been. Samuel had dragged it off before the sun came up, buried it shallow beneath a tangle of fallen logs. No marker, no words, just dirt. Even so, Thomas felt the man's presence like a splinter under his skin. Not the memory of the fight, but the stillness afterward, the way Crawford's eyes had stayed open, as if they had one last thing to say but couldn't. The cold pressed deeper. Thomas flexed his hands, still feeling the tacky ghost of dried blood in the creases of his palms. He'd washed them in the stream hours ago, but the stain was in him now, not on him. "We should head back before noon," Samuel said finally, his voice flat. Thomas didn't move. His eyes were locked on the tree line where the early light caught on drifting motes of ash, making them glow for a moment before they fell. He thought about the men who had run last night, company workers who might carry tales back to the town, or worse, to the bosses who'd sent them. This wasn't over. Not yet. "We will," Thomas answered almost absently. But he didn't turn to follow them. He stayed there a little longer, letting the cold morning air wrap around him, wondering if a man could feel both